The 1990s were a great time to grow up being a horror fan with lots of great spooky shows for kids, including Are You Afraid of the Dark?, the original live-action Goosebumps series, the animated version of Tales from the Crypt with Tales from the Crypt Keeper, and the triumphant return of Scooby-Doo. But one of the most forgotten and underrated shows, but one that has also been credited for paving the way for many of these others, was the criminally underrated and short-lived Eerie, Indiana, that lasted for only one season with just 19 episodes being produced. Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another retrospective video. Today we're going to be talking about Eerie, Indiana. The series revolves around Marshall Teller, played by Omri Katz, who many of us will remember as Max from another 90s classic, Hocus Pocus, who along with his family moves to the desolate town of Eerie, Indiana. There, Marshall meets and befriends Simon, and together they investigate the various strange occurrences in town that everyone else, most notably the adults, don't seem to notice. Even Marshall's own family are completely oblivious to the strange and bizarre nature of the town. So Marshall makes it his mission to gather as much evidence as he can to prove the existence of strange and paranormal activity in Eerie, which includes various stories featuring monsters, ghosts, aliens, time travel, and even alternate realities, with each episode featuring a mostly different cast, very much giving it a horror anthology feel, and many have often referred to it as the Twilight Zone for kids. One of the main locations heavily featured in the series is an odd convenience store called The World of Stuff, run by the mysterious Mr. Radcliffe, played by Archie Hahn. And while the show was primarily aimed at kids and was very kid-friendly, it was actually very well written and featured a lot of adult themes and satire that would go over the heads of most kids, with there being a lot of dark and subtle subtext that really you can only pick up on as an adult. It's especially enjoyable if you're someone who has kept your inner child alive and remembers being interested in the supernatural and monster movies as a kid. One of the things that makes watching the show so enjoyable as an adult, as someone who didn't kill their inner child, is enjoying a lot of the satire towards people who have killed their inner child. And that's very much the idea of the show, that adults can't see what's going on around them because they have no imagination and are desensitized. And as someone who's had to deal with a lot of people like that in my own personal life, I could definitely relate to that. And it's a big part of why I enjoy the show as an adult. The show itself has often been labeled as the X-Files for kids, or Twin Peaks for kids, and it definitely does feel like a cross between those two shows, with some influence from Twin Peaks, with it mainly being set in a small town. But when it comes to the X-Files, Eerie, Indiana actually predates the X-Files by about 2 years. So if anything, the X-Files should actually be labeled as Eerie, Indiana for adults. But the show it shares the most similarities with would probably be Friday the 13th, the series, which of course focused on stories about cursed antiques. In Eerie, Indiana, Marshall normally collects a piece of evidence from each episode and stores them in the attic of their house, very similar to how in Friday the 13th the series, where they stored the cursed objects in a secret vault. Much of the look and tone of the show itself can be credited to the involvement of director Joe Dante, who directed several episodes of the series and was also credited as a creative consultant on the series overall. Joe Dante of course directed many 80s classics like Gremlins, The Howling, and one of my personal favorites, The Burbs, which actually has a very similar look and feel to it. After the first run of 13 episodes, one of which didn't air during the original network broadcast, the series was retooled slightly. First, with Mr. Radford being revealed as an imposter, with Gomez Addams himself, John Astin, being revealed as the actual Mr. Radford, who has been tied up in the basement the whole time, while the imposter Radford gets taken away. It's so bizarre that it's kind of hard to tell if this was something that was actually planned from the beginning, or was just a really clever bit of recasting. It's pretty funny either way, and John Astin is definitely a welcome addition to the series. In addition to the new Mr. Radford, an entirely new character was introduced who would later become known as Dash X, played by the famous voice actor Jason Marsden, who would also later end up in Hocus Pocus as the voice of Thackeray Binks. Is first introduced in episode 13 titled The Hole in the Head Gang. Dash claims that he just woke up in Eerie, Indiana one day without any knowledge of how he got there, nor does he have any memory of his parents, where he came from originally, or his real name, or at least that's what he claims. claims. Dash ultimately is a pretty abrasive character, really only looking out for himself most of the time, and often getting Marshall and Simon in more trouble than they would normally. Some occasions Dash would end up begrudgingly helping Marshall and Simon solve some of Erie's various mysteries, but only if he would get something in return. Most notably in episode 16, helping them infiltrate the Loyal Order of the Corn Cult, which is actually the only episode that even slightly hints as to who or what Dash might be. It's also the episode where he gave himself the name Dash X, as a reference to the mysterious Dash and X markings on his hands, which were shared by the extraterrestrial leader of the cult itself. The final produced episode of the entire series was a fourth wall-breaking sequence of events depicting Dash's attempts to take over as the show itself, where Marshall finds himself on the set of the actual show of Erie, Indiana, which Dash is somehow responsible for. A truly wonderful episode that might be the best of the entire series, and even includes a cameo from Joe Dante himself. And with the show being prematurely cancelled, the character of Dash X has very much remained a mystery, but it seems likely based on this episode that had the show continued, Dash would have become more of a foil to Marshall rather than an ally. Although technically this was not the last episode to air, as one episode from earlier in the series that was omitted from the original broadcast, titled The Broken Record, which did eventually air during reruns. So because this episode didn't air until a few years later, it's often listed as being the last episode of the series, including on the DVD releases, when it really isn't. So my advice is to watch this episode before the introduction of Dash X in episode 13. This way the real final episode, titled Reality Takes a Holiday, works much better as a finale to the overall series, even though they probably didn't realize it would be the last episode at the time. It's really a shame because it really seems like they were only just getting started with exploring the kinds of stories and direction that the show could possibly go in. NBC's reasoning for cancelling the series essentially came down to their own incompetence on how to market the show. When it was later rerun on the Disney Channel in 1993, then later in 1997 on the Fox Kids network, the show started to generate a new fan base, gaining something of a cult following despite its very short run. The renewed popularity of the series encouraged Fox Kids to revive the series in the form of Erie, Indiana: The Other Dimension, once again lasting for only one season, this time with a total of only 15 episodes in 1998. The series is pretty much unanimously considered to be inferior to the original show. Instead of Marshall and Simon, The Other Dimension focuses on Mitchell and his best friend Stanley, who also live in Erie, Indiana, but not the same one, instead another dimension. But one neat connection between the two shows is in the first episode that has Mitchell and Stanley communicating with Marshall and Simon through their satellite TV, but unfortunately it's just stock footage from the original show with different actors providing the voiceover, which I suppose makes sense since they had probably aged a little bit by this point, but it would have been cool had they actually found a way to bring them back proper. So even though the show itself wasn't that great, I can at least appreciate that they tried to connect the two shows in a very cool and Erie, Indiana kind of way. In terms of the availability of the show itself, the complete series has been previously released on DVD in both Region 1 and Region 2 land, both sets now being out of print, but you can still find them if you hunt around a bit. And if not, the show and its reboot The Other Dimension can be found online in pretty decent quality as well. Overall, Erie, Indiana is easily one of the most beloved and best shows that lasted for only one season, and as sad as it might be that the show didn't run longer, we should cherish what we did get out of the show rather than what we didn't, because what we did get is pretty special. Thanks for watching this retrospective video. Be sure to subscribe for more videos, and until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible, and I will see you in the next video.